All right, now my bracelet is finished. It is the full length that I need. My last step is I need to end the beadwork and add a clasp. In order to end the beadwork, we're going to do something called a tapered edge, and it does involve just a few more lines of beadwork on either end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle, and you can see my beadwork has 5 beads across. This time, I'm going to only get 3 beads on my needle. I am choosing to use black, but you may use whatever color you would like. Pick something that goes with your pattern. So that's 3 beads, and I'm going to string it on just the way that I always have. But this time you need to make sure that the 3 beads are in the 3 center spaces like so. And I am going to feed my needle through those 3 beads in the center, like this. Now, don't worry about these warp threads on the side, but because we are moving in from the warp threads here, I'm going to take my needle and feed it up to go on the inside of that outer right warp thread. So I'm going to pull my needle up so that my needle is on the inside of that warp thread, and then I'm going to feed my needle through the beads like so. Then, just for security, you're going to take your needle, go back into what's actually the second bead from the left, so the second black bead here. I'm going to feed in to that bead, come out the third bead like this, and then I'm just going to go back through that last row one more time, like so. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the other side of my thread. I'm going to deal more with this in a moment, because I need to add a little bit more onto my starter side. So what I'm going to do is unthread my needle from this warp at the end, and then I need to loosen my wing nuts on either end, because I need to twist my bracelet back into the other direction. If my wing nuts will loosen. There we go. So I'm just twisting back in the opposite direction so that I have a clear length of thread along this top part of my bracelet. So I'm going to now tighten my wing nuts again on both sides. Perfect. Now I am working with a very little bit of thread here, which is fine, we can make it work, but ideally I should have left a little bit more of a tail. I'm going to thread my needle and I'm going to grab 3 beads onto it. I'm going to go with black again. So I'm doing the very same thing I did on the other side. I'm just grabbing 3 beads, drop my thread underneath these warp threads, pull tight, and then I'm going to come up under this warp thread on the end before I feed into these 3 beads, making sure that I am on top of the other warp threads. It can be a little tricky. Okay. And I'm going to pull tight, And just to be safe, I'm going to feed through the middle 3 beads on the row below. Be a little tricky to get your needle in there, but be patient. Okay, so I'm feeding through, and then I'm going to feed back up through that last row of 3 beads one more time. Pull through, pull tight. Okay, and I have tapered off this row. Now my bracelet is 5 beads. Okay, so if your bracelet is 7 beads, this is going to go slightly differently. You'll have a cut-in right after this part where I explain what to do differently with a 7 bead bracelet. Now here I have a 7 bead bracelet. See, there's 7 beads across, and we're still going to reduce and make it narrower like we did with the 5 bead. But instead of one row of 3 beads, we're going to start by making a row of 5. So I'm going to pick whatever colors I would like to continue my pattern with. For me, I'm going to keep going with the pattern I've been creating on my bracelet. I have my needle threaded, and I'm going to select my beads. So now I have 5 beads on my needle. I'm going to thread them on. Put my needle underneath my warp threads and align my beads so they sit in the middle 5 slots like this. Come up underneath that first warp thread on the right and feed my needle back through the beads. And here is one row reduced, so the row below has 7, the row I just added has 5. Then I'm going to add one more, and to help me reduce, I'm just going to go through the last row, the 2 beads below, through the 2 beads above, and out. That step is optional. I just think it gives a cleaner look. And now I need 3 beads in the row above. So again, I'm going to continue my pattern. Okay, so underneath, like this. Need to come up through the second warp thread now. And I'm popping my 3 beads into that space, threading through those beads on top of the warp threads, pulling tight. So now I have a stack that goes 7, 5, 3. So I'm ending on 3, just like I did with my 5 across bracelet. Then to just keep the warp thread nice and tight, or the weft thread nice and tight, I'm just going to weave back in to some of my beads underneath, just to give good tension so that nothing comes undone. Like so, just so it's nice and tight. Now you're going to go back and watch the next step on the 5 bracelet, and then you'll be back to the 7 bead bracelet in a minute. Your next step, it's time to take the bracelet off of the loom. So I'm loosening both of my wing nuts. And I am untwisting so that I can lift the knot. And I'm going to remove my bracelet off of my loom. and it looks like this. We are almost done here. For this next part, you're still going to be needing your bead needle. You're going to need a clasp, and you're going to need 2 of what are called pony beads. These beads are much smaller than or much bigger than the beads you've been working on your bracelet so far. So what is going to happen now is you are going to grab and you are going to cut the knot on your warp threads. Please cut as close to the knot as possible. So if my knot's here, I'm cutting right next to it. Like this. And I can leave the other knot for now. I'll deal with it after. And now I need to get rid of some of my warp threads that are on the outer edge. What I need to do is I'm going to sew them in to my work. So I'm going to take the outermost warp thread that is on my left. I'm going to thread that warp thread onto my needle. Like this. And then I'm going to take that warp thread and I'm going to thread it inside my work here. So I'm going to feed it into the first 3 beads in my last full row. So I'm zooming in here for you. So I feed it in the blue, and the yellow. And I string it in. And then I'm going to go up to the yellow in the next layer. And I'm going to go back out of the bracelet in those 3 beads. Pull out. Then I'm going to go back in, and this time I'm going to go through the last 2 beads. So just these 2 yellows. And I'm going to pull out. And then in the row above, I'm going to go into those last 2 beads. And I'm going to just do this one more time. I'm going to go into the row above. I'm going to feed in to the 3 beads. So the white, and the yellow. And I'm going to pull out. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to snip the thread, and it will disappear into my beadwork. And now this side of my bracelet is clear of a warp thread, but it is still secure. My next step is I'm going to do the same thing with my next warp thread that is on the right side of my bracelet. So I am going to take my needle, I'm going to thread the warp thread onto my needle. Sometimes it's going to take a second. Pull it through a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to take my warp thread. I'm going to go through the last full row, and I'm going to go through the first 3 beads, so the 2 blacks and the yellow. I'm going to pull through. I'm going to go up into the middle yellow bead. Like this. I'm going to go up into the row above. I'm going to go through the 2 beads, pull through, go through that yellow bead in the row above, like this, and I accidentally pulled the warp thread off of my needle, but that should be fine because I think I'm good. So I've threaded that through, and I'm going to just snip off the rest of the thread and it will disappear into the rest of my beadwork. So now I still have my warp thread, or my weft thread, and 4 warp threads. I'm going to gather them all together like this. Now it helps in this situation to twist them together as much as you can. Okay, you want it to be really well twisted because you are going to take the pony bead and you need to thread all of those strings through the 1 pony bead. So it's going to look like this. Then, after you've threaded the pony bead, you are going to take either your lobster clasp or your ring, and you need to thread one of those onto the thread. All those threads should still be gathered together like this. And then here's where it gets a little tricky, so you're just going to have to be patient. All of these threads that are still twisted together need to go back through the pony bead again. So I'm doing a good twist so I've got them all together and they're easier to get through. Okay, and it looks like I've gotten them all through. You're going to be pulling that thread tight, and then what you need to do is you are going to wrap all those threads around that little gathering. Okay, so I've wrapped in a little loop here, just a little loop, and I need to tuck those tails through the loop to make a knot, just like we were doing way back when we were first attaching our beads to our loom. And I'm pulling tight, and my thread's a little loose, but it's not the end of the world for it to be a little bit flexible. And then I can snip those extra threads. Like so. That is one end of my bracelet done. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side of my bracelet, but I'm going to do it sped up so you can still watch what I'm doing, but I'm not going to walk you through the directions. All right, now I'm going to show you what to do with the warp threads on a 7-bead bracelet. It's very, very similar. I'm going to start by cutting the knot like that. And then I'm going to take my outermost warp thread and I'm going to thread my needle onto it. So I'm going to get my needle onto there. Sometimes if you're having trouble getting your needle through, you might want to try cutting the thread to get a cleaner end, and it will thread a little better. There we go. Okay. So I thread my outermost warp thread onto my needle, and then that warp thread needs to get woven in to the right side of my beadwork. So I'm going to go into the bead it comes out of and go over 3, go out, I'm going to go back in above, and again in the row above that. And I'm going to do that one more time just to make sure it's very, very secure. And then one last time, just because I don't want it to fall off. All right, except that thread's a little short, so I'm going to leave it there. And I can cut that extra thread on the side, like that. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. So I'm going to weave it through. So I thread my needle onto that warp thread. I think I'm going to do that off camera, it's just easier. Alright, and once that is threaded on, you're going to do the same thing. You are going to go back into the row it came out of, and you want to go in the first 3 beads in that row. Pull, and then go into the 3 beads below that. The longer your extra threads are, the easier this is, okay? And as always, you talk to me if you are struggling. Okay. And then I'm going to go in again to the row below that. Almost lost my tail there. There we go. Through, and then I think I can get this to go through one more time. So I'm going to go into one row below and come out. There we go. And then I'll trim that excess as well. Okay, now Where this is different than the 5 bead bracelet is now I need to weave in the new outermost warp threads that are now on the ends. Okay, so that is these two that I have splayed out. Those need to get woven in as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that a little quicker this time for you. And then when you only have 4 threads left, that is when you are going to add your 1 pony bead and either your O-ring or your clasp. So twist all those threads together as much as you are able. Thread the pony bead onto your 4 threads. There we go. So thread the pony bead onto those threads. Then I'm going to thread my ring on. Feed it on. Feed the threads back through the pony bead. Make sure the ring stays above the pony bead. It likes to fall to the other side. Okay, pull through, and then you're gonna tie a knot below the pony bead as tight as you can. Okay, and then I'm going to pull tight. Make sure everything is as tight as I can get it. And I'll do the same thing with the other side. And I can trim that extra here. All right, now I'll send you to the conclusion of the video. Now, once your bracelet is done, the very last thing that I like to do just for extra security is on the knots I tied, I will take a little thing of crazy glue and I'm just gonna do a little dab on both knots just so that I know everything will stay secure. It's just a tiny little dab, let it dry, and then your bracelet is ready to wear. So, just to show you, here is the finished product. Now, when you're done, make sure you turn it in.